Welcome to our exploration of two profound chapters in the book of Genesis. Today, we're diving deep into Genesis chapters 22 and 23 stories that beautifully reveal the nature of faith, the importance of obedience, the power of trust, and the certainty of God's promises. As we journey through these ancient narratives, we'll uncover timeless truths that speak directly to our lives today, offering guidance, encouragement, and a deeper understanding of God's character. Let's begin with Genesis chapter 22, a passage that contains one of the most dramatic and testing moments in all of Scripture. The chapter opens with God calling out to Abraham, a man he has already led on an incredible journey of faith. But this call is different. God says, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." Let's just pause and try to absorb the sheer weight of that command. Isaac wasn't just any son. He was the child of promise, born to Abraham and Sarah in their old age, the very embodiment of God's covenant. He was the future, and God was asking Abraham to surrender that future, to give up the one thing that was most precious to him. It's a command that, from a human perspective, seems utterly incomprehensible, even contradictory to God's earlier promises. How could Abraham's descendants become a great nation if the heir was to be sacrificed? This is where Abraham's extraordinary faith shines through. The Bible tells us that early the next morning, Abraham got up, saddled his donkey, and set out with Isaac and 2 servants. There was no hesitation, no arguing, no delay. He simply obeyed. This immediate response reveals a profound trust in God's character. Abraham didn't understand the why, but he knew the who. He knew that the God who had miraculously provided a son could be trusted, even in this dark and confusing moment. He carried the fire and the knife, while Isaac carried the wood for the offering, and together they journeyed toward the place God had appointed. As they walked, Isaac, in his innocence, asked his father a piercing question. "The fire and wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Imagine the ache in Abraham's heart. Yet his reply is a masterclass in faith. God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering. My son. This wasn't just a comforting lie to a child. It was a profound statement of faith. Abraham believed that God would somehow resolve this impossible situation, perhaps even by raising Isaac from the dead, as the book of Hebrews later suggests. He was holding on to the promise, trusting that God's plan was greater than his understanding. When they reached the mountain, Abraham built an altar. He arranged the wood. Then he bound his beloved son Isaac and laid him on the altar, on top of the wood. This must have been the most agonizing moment of his life. He reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. In that climactic, heart-stopping instant, just as his will was completely surrendered to God's, the angel of the Lord called out from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham, do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." At that moment, Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. God had indeed provided a substitute. Abraham took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. He named that place Yahweh Yireh, which means the Lord will provide. This story is a powerful illustration of obedience, unwavering faith, and the incredible provision of God. It teaches us that true faith often requires us to trust God's plan, even when it feels painful or makes no sense. It's about trusting his heart when we can't trace his hand. Following this ultimate test of faith, God didn't just commend Abraham. He powerfully reaffirmed and expanded his covenant promises. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time, declaring, "I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore." God's promises were not just renewed. They were magnified because of Abraham's obedience. His descendants would not only be numerous, but would also possess the cities of their enemies. And through his offspring, all nations on earth would be blessed. This links Abraham's act of faith directly to the future blessing of the entire world, a promise ultimately fulfilled in Jesus Christ, the ultimate offspring of Abraham. This moment solidifies the connection between obedience and blessing. When we trust and obey God, even in our greatest trials, we position ourselves to receive the fullness of his promises. Now, we shift from the dramatic peak of Mount Moriah to the quiet sorrow of Genesis chapter 23. This chapter deals with a very different, but equally significant, moment in Abraham's life, the death of his beloved wife, Sarah, at the age of 127. The chapter opens with Abraham mourning and weeping for her. His grief is palpable and deeply human. But even in his sorrow, Abraham acts with purpose and faith. He understands the importance of securing a permanent burial place for Sarah in the land God had promised to his descendants. This wasn't just about finding a place for a tomb. It was a profound act of faith. At this time, Abraham was a sojourner, a foreigner living among the Hittites in the land of Canaan. He had no legal claim to any piece of it. So, he approached the Hittites with humility and respect, requesting to buy a piece of their land for a burial site. He said, "I am a foreigner and a stranger among you. Sell me some property for a burial site here so I can bury my dead." The Hittites responded with great honor, offering him the choice of the best of their tombs and even suggesting he could use one for free. They called him a mighty prince among them. However, Abraham insisted on purchasing the land outright. He specifically requested the cave of Machpelah, which belonged to a man named Ephron the Hittite. Ephron, in a grand gesture of hospitality typical of the ancient Near East, offered to give Abraham the cave and the field it was in. But Abraham knew that a gift could be reclaimed. To secure a permanent, undisputed inheritance for his family, he insisted on paying the full market price. The negotiation that follows is a fascinating look into ancient customs, but the key takeaway is Abraham's integrity. He didn't want any favors. He paid the stated price of 400 shekels of silver, a significant sum, and the sale was publicly witnessed and legally finalized. He wasn't just buying a tomb. He was making a down payment on the promised land. The purchase of the cave of Machpelah is far more significant than just a real estate transaction. It was the very first piece of the promised land that Abraham's family legally owned. By burying Sarah there, and later being buried there himself, along with Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah, Abraham was physically and symbolically staking a claim. He was demonstrating his unwavering belief that God's promise to give this land to his descendants would come to pass. His actions declared, "This land is ours, not by conquest, but by promise, and we will wait for God to fulfill his word in his time." This act of burying his dead in Canaan was a powerful testament to his long-term faith. It showed that he saw beyond his own lifetime and trusted in a future he would not live to see. So, what are the vital lessons we can draw from these two powerful chapters? First, and most clearly, is the call to trust God even when the path is completely unclear. Abraham on Mount Moriah had no roadmap, just a command and a relationship with God. Our lives will have moments of confusion and pain where God's plan seems hidden. In those times, we are called to trust his character, his goodness, and his sovereignty, just as Abraham did. Second, we see that obedience is the key that unlocks God's promises. God didn't bless Abraham because he was perfect, but because he obeyed. When Abraham was willing to surrender everything, God provided everything and more. Our obedience, even in small things, demonstrates our trust and opens the door for God to work in and through our lives in powerful ways. Third, true faith often involves sacrifice and a deep trust in God's provision. Abraham was willing to sacrifice his most cherished treasure, and in response, God provided a substitute. This beautifully foreshadows the ultimate sacrifice of God's own Son, Jesus Christ, who became our substitute on the cross. The story of Yahweh Yireh, the Lord will provide, is not just Abraham's story, it is our story too. God provides what we need, most importantly, our salvation. Finally, Genesis 23 teaches us about the importance of integrity and faithfulness in our daily lives. Abraham's honest and honorable dealings with the Hittites showed that his faith wasn't just for mountaintop experiences. It shaped his character in everyday transactions. He acted with integrity, which in turn solidified his claim to God's promise. Our faith should also be practical, influencing how we treat others, how we do business, and how we live as citizens of heaven while being foreigners on earth. In conclusion, Genesis chapters 22 and 23 present a rich tapestry of faith in action. From the terrifying test on the mountain to the sorrowful transaction in the valley, Abraham's life consistently points to a singular truth. God is faithful, and his promises are sure. Abraham's journey reminds us that faith is not a static belief, but a dynamic walk of trust, obedience, and surrender. It's a journey marked by tests that refine us, sorrows that ground us, and a constant reliance on God's unwavering provision and guidance. May we, like Abraham, learn to trust God's plan, obey his voice, and walk in the certainty that his promises for us are just as reliable today as they were for Abraham thousands of years ago. Thank you so much for joining us for this study. If this message encouraged you, please like, share, and subscribe for more insights from the Bible. Stay faithful, keep trusting in his promises, and walk in obedience. We'll see you next time.